So, hi, Stuart. You are the first time on the show. So, what I would like to know first is how you started programming. So, what was your first Hello World?
I first started programming in high school with Visual Basic, and then moved on to C++.
Okay. And what is your first computer? So, you started at home? So, you had something before, or you had to program?
At home, when I was very little, we had an IBM computer that I don't know exactly what it was. And then we got a Pentium 100 at about the time that I started programming.
Oh, so it's not like, history with C64 or ZX. So you started with a modern Pentium.
Yeah.
And you started gaming or wanted to, to hack something?
I wanted to be a games programmer back in high school, but that changed as I grew older and just sort of lost interest in games.
Oh, so you gamed first, and then at high school you started with Visual Basic in the hope that you can program some games?
Yes.
Cool. And how it turned out? So how quickly you found out that Visual Basic is not the best language for gaming?
I think I knew that right from the start, but it was just all that I had available at the time, and it was a good thing to learn on.
Mm-hmm. And the next step was? So if you started with...
C++. I had ball in C++ at one point.
Mm-hmm. And how it happened?
OpenGL.
So you stopped with Visual Basic and then you moved to C++, or how it happened? So how was the transition? You had to do this because of school, or you somehow found out that C++ is, the great programming language?
It was just my own personal interest. So I had to get hold of a compiler because this was sort of didn't have good internet back then. I had to buy the ball and C++ compiler. So yeah, I didn't have access to any Linux machines or anything like that. So I just sort of was making do with what I had.
And what is your first app?
My first, as in
program or whatever you did with C++, which was more than, Hello World?
I can't remember. I definitely wrote Tetris at one point.
Hey, cool. So it really worked?
Yeah, it worked.
And you just borrowed the algorithm from somewhere, or was just completely your invention?
It was completely my invention, I think.
Wow, this is remarkable, actually. How long did it took to implement Tetris from scratch with C++?
I can't remember. This was many years ago now.
Yeah, but was it 1 year or 2 weeks?
It was definitely weeks rather than years. I'd done a fair bit of programming in Visual Basic by that point, so I understood. I understood how to program. It was just learning C++ and the Windows APIs to sort of draw stuff, and that was the main learning sort of curve for me.
Okay, and what was your first commercial application?
It was a app for the financial planning industry that was just sort of a CRM type thing.
In Visual Basic or C++?
That was in PHP.
PHP, okay. So it was
That was a few years later.
Okay. So you studied computer science, right?
Yeah, I studied computer science at Wollongong University.
Mm-hmm. So you really like programming. So this is what I wanted to know. So how you started and what is your road to programming? So the Tetris stuff was before your university, I think, right?
Yeah, by the time I went to university, I was already fairly proficient in C++. I'd written sort of 3D games in OpenGL. So I already knew how to program by the time I went to university.
Interesting. And what happened, with Java? So how you started Java, how you found Java, what was your road to Java?
Basically, it just seemed like a much better language for writing apps in than PHP. So I taught myself Java and then basically got a job using Java.
Mm-hmm. Which version was it? You remember? Which Java version?
1.5.
1.5. This is so you already had access to annotations, right?
Yeah, so I had annotations, I had generics, I had all the good stuff.
Wow,
I never really had to deal with 1.4.
So you are like a Java youngster.
I guess so, but that's been out for a while now.
And what was your first Java application you wrote?
It was another commercial one. It basically just tracked. It was also in the financial industry, just sort of an accounting type package.
It was it Australia or where was it?
Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when was it? So I assume 2006, 2007, I guess, with JDK 1.5, right?
Yeah, it probably would have been about 2007, I think.
Okay. And how the climate was in Australia back then? So it was like everything was Java, or I have no idea, what happens in Australia actually Java-wise. So can you briefly explain, what is Java popular in Australia, or what's the deal with Java and Australia and commercial industry?
Yeah, I think Java is definitely popular in Australia. I think it's popular everywhere for writing business applications. I can't really say if it's any different in Australia to the rest of the world, but in my experience, there's a lot of people using Java.
Okay, yeah, this is the same here in Europe. And if you started with your Java, was it a client-side application with Swing JavaFX, or was it server-side?
No, it was all server-side.
Okay.
Using Seam and JBoss 4.2, I think.
Okay, so you started, with Java server-side with Java EE-like stack, right?
Yes.
And your first app was PHP, and then you transitioned to Java EE. So what was your impression, because usually PHP, people saying that this is more lightweight, and then you had to do some Seam. So you liked that or not, or what was your reaction?
I definitely liked it. I never really liked PHP because I was a C++ programmer that just sort of got a job writing PHP basically to earn some money. But I definitely prefer strongly typed languages.
This is interesting. So there was already a couple of people on the show who had a background in gaming and C++, and they all like Java EE. So what I assumed is this is like, Java EE is for lazy developers who don't like, to the hard stuff like C++, C, and therefore they just use Java EE. But it seems like Java is popular among, the C++ in low-level developers, and they really appreciate how Java EE feels like. This is surprised me really on the show. So you are the next one who has background with, gaming, C++, low-level programming, and appreciates Java EE.
Yeah, to be honest, it's been a long time since I really did any significant C++ programming. Once I sort of started working with Java commercially, then that was most of the programming that I did.
Yeah, I had also similar background. So I started with C++ and then found Java, but it was JDK 1.0. Really like that, stick with the server, and I'm using Java till now, but I also really like it. So then you stick with Java EE?
Yeah, well, from there I ended up eventually getting a job with Red Hat.
So how this happened? This is interesting.
I basically just started contributing to Weld in my spare time. And because I found it really interesting, and it was just more interesting to work on than what I was doing at work. So I basically just started contributing, and then when a position opened up, I applied and got the job at Red Hat.
What you did contributed to Weld? Weld, I mean the CDI implementation, right?
Yeah.
So what you did? So what was your contribution, your very first contribution to Weld? What was it?
I don't remember the first one. Some of the stuff, one of my main contributions, though, was performance improvements. I did a lot of work on basically making it start faster and improving the runtime performance. So that was, and I also fixed a lot of issues around the portable extension API that the 1.0 version had. Because I also wrote a lot of what turned into, some of what turned into Delta Spike, like the some like the XML configuration and a few other things there.
And then you started at Red Hat as a full-time Weld contributor?
No, I started on the AS7 team. So when I joined, AS7 was just kicking off. They just released Alpha 1 that supported servlet, not much else.
Mm-hmm.
So then my job was full-time AS7.
Mm-hmm. And
so I implemented Weld in AS7, but like the CDI in AS7, but I also did a lot of just the Java EE side of AS7.
And what do you mean by AS7? Is this the JBoss AIP, or what do you mean by AS7?
Sorry, JBoss Application Server 7.
Okay.
So what turned into Wildfly back then we just called it AS7.
And how it happened with the Whitefly? So was it like whose idea was it? So on how it happened? I just recognized back then that there was like name finding at the Devox Belgium. So you had like a poll, what should be the name of the Whitefly? But who had the idea? Who got the idea how it happened? You know that? So back then?
I don't know who came up with the final name, but I think there was just a thought within Red Hat that JBoss is a lot more than just the application server. So it was kind of confusing to have the application server that everyone was just calling JBoss when JBoss did a lot more than just the application server. So that was why I think they renamed it.
So it's more like, branding or cleanup, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this was the reason. Interesting. And since then, what you did? You stick with JBoss?
So then after the application server was released, I ended up writing a new web server. Like I wrote Undertow.
Ah.
I've mostly been working on that until, I guess, the last 10 months now, where I've been working mostly full-time on Quarkus. To be honest, a lot more than full-time on Quarkus.
Oh, that's really cool. So you are the guy behind Undertow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And what was your work on AS7? So you remember the task or what you had to implement, or what was it? What you implemented?
I did a bit of everything, but I mostly focused on the Java EE side of things. So I did CDI, I implemented a big chunk of EJB, I implemented the Corba support, the application client, just a lot of just general, all the stuff that sort of ties the Java EE components in together I worked with.
Okay.
As well as a fair bit of the core server.
So now it's interesting because in one point of time, Whitefly deactivated pooling of EJBs, which caused performance issues, and you could reactivate that, but it was shipped with deactivated pooling. You know why?
I think there was just a thought that for a lot of applications that it's hard to come up with a default pool size that sort of makes sense for everyone. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of situations, that default pool size will actually cause more performance issues than what it solves. Mm-hmm. So what makes sense for one app might not make sense for another. And if your EJB isn't doing expensive work and it's post-construct, then you don't really get that much benefits from pooling anyway. Instead, you're dealing with all this extra concurrency with the locks and whatever that's around the pool. So actually, unless your EJBs are expensive to create, you'll actually get better performance without pooling.
This made me actually a hero with some projects because I knew that if you reactivate the pooling again, you will gain some performance. So in some clients, I walk in, reactivate the pooling, and the application was 20% faster. And everyone said, "Wow, you are an expert." It's like, yeah, kind of. So funny. But regarding the pooling, what I found out that EJB are usually faster with the pooling, and not because something happens in post-construct, rather than if EJBs are pooled, or the stubs with @inject are injected once per instance. And if the EJBs are not pooled, the injection has to happen, on every request. And this is what makes the not pool component slower. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. But on the flip side, you're also adding in locks and the potential for concurrency issues. So if your pool's too small, then you can actually get a much bigger performance hit from having a wrongly sized pool.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Than what you can get from bnject.
Yeah.
And from our point of view with the default config, we know nothing about your app, so we can't. It's very hard to sort of guess at what the correct default pool size is for, because we can only ship one size for every application.
Mm-hmm. No,
So
I'm just asking because in my eyes, CDI one point of time should support pooling as well to come with better performance of if you inject a tree of components, and then we could kill actually EJBs. But right now, CDI doesn't have any pooled scope. So what is your opinion from the implementation perspective on that?
I think you could do it with portable extensions, I think.
Yeah, but...
Yeah, you could definitely do it with portable extensions. I think it's something that potentially we could look at standardizing at some point in the future.
Exactly. This is what I mean. Because then we could kill EJBs entirely, and having less specs is always good, for simplicity. So we don't have to have overlapping functionality between EJBs and CDI, and then we could kill EJBs entirely and focus on CDI, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So for Quarkus, I think we're unlikely to do a full EJB implementation because there's just so much stuff in it that people don't really use that much in modern apps.
Yeah.
But what we'll do instead is take out the bits that people think are useful, like, say, transactions and pooling, and just have separate CDI-based implementations.
Yeah, exactly. And there is on GitHub, so there's also a funny story. I recorded an online workshop, Java EE testing. And just for fun, I compared the performance between request-scoped CDI and EJBs. And EJBs tend to be, I think, 20% or 10% faster. I don't remember anymore. And someone from IBM watched the screencast, couldn't believe that, and had created a formal test on GitHub. And the guy called Samo Lisov. So I have it on my blog interview, and it turned out that EJB are the fastest component model because of that. And pooling is not regarding, the new and garbage collection, rather than pooling because if you inject other components, the injection happens only once. So this was also interesting, and was why also funny because sometimes in my projects, architects try to remove EJBs to gain performance, and then they make everything slower, which is somehow funny and sad at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder if that would still be true with Quarkus, because it's using a different CDI implementation where the code that does the injection is basically, it's not using reflection, it's just generated code to do the injection.
Now we can focus on Quarkus. So now no one knows what Quarkus is, right? Our audience. So now the question is how you started with Quarkus. So what was your road to Quarkus? Who got the idea? Why? What is the background?
So basically it started as just a small team that was looking at what we could do to basically get a faster runtime that we can take advantage of GraalVM. And basically we just had this sort of exploration phase that went on for 3 months where we looked at getting our frameworks running on GraalVM and sort of what a platform designed for native compilation might actually look like. Mm-hmm. So we sort of had a 3-month proof of concept phase where we explored all that. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, we pretty much had Hibernate working and a new version of CDI that compiled directly down to bytecode that was optimized for native compilation, and sort of a general platform where we could run simple apps on. Mm-hmm. And that was the start of it, really.
How big was the team?
I think it was about 8 people.
Okay, so it's not that big.
Mm-hmm. No, not that big.
Okay, interesting. So the main idea between Quarkus is to make, let's say, popular or subset of Java EE natively compiled with GraalVM to native code, right?
Yes. But we also want a really good Java experience as well. Mm-hmm. So we still want to have a really optimized JVM experience. Mm-hmm. So even if you can't take advantage of GraalVM, we still want Quarkus to be a compelling platform.
Mm-hmm. Were you somehow involved in Swarm as well, or just at Red Hat you did Undertow and then started with Quarkus?
No, I was never really involved in Swarm.
Yeah.
I submitted 1 or 2 patches to it, but that's mm-hmm. it.
Because I sent you before a few emails last weeks because I recorded some screencasts about Quarkus, And I found a Quarkus by accident. And I have to say, it is the very first time where I see something different to, let's say, stock Whitefly or stock Payara with significant added value. So usually, all the runtimes like Swarm or Payara Micro or the others, they just repackage existing server, throw away, like domain stuff and make it a little bit leaner. But the added value is for me or my project is actually not existing. And for Quarkus, it is even without Graal, there is a really interesting approach, a new approach, fresh approach with, I would say, with significant added value for the projects. Because what you also did, this is what I found very interesting. You are separating the base layer, the application server infrastructure stuff, at least is my understanding, from the business logic, which is the runner. So you, for the listeners, what you get is you get a lib folder with the infrastructure code, and you get the runner, which is tiny, or let's say 50K, I think, something like this, and it references the libraries and contains business logic, right?
Yes.
So, and this is actually, sorry for the interruption, but this is fed jars with layering. And this is from the beginning with the old tooling around that. And this is what makes my idea, I don't know whether you read my stuff about ThinJARs, very compatible with my point of view. Like, the infrastructure has to be, built once and never again. And we just focus on business logic. And this is what I found really interesting, a complete different approach to Java EE deployment, but the same idea.
Yeah, and we actually want to do more stuff with this going forward. Like, ideally, eventually we want to get to the point where you can just have your app, which is just your business logic, and then you can actually use our tooling to basically have something on a cloud platform where you can update the underlying platform without having to recompile your app or do anything like that. So if there's a CVE or something in Quarkus, you'd be able to just hit a button in OpenShift and generate a new image with the new version of Quarkus without having to recompile your app or change POMs or do any of that sort of thing. So that's something we're working towards. There's still a lot more we need to do with the tooling around that.
And this would be actually the definition of serverless.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, we had on my podcast in the previous episodes a lots of discussion about serverless before Quarkus, and my idea was just have a ThinJAR with Java EE business logic, push it to the cloud, and the cloud is a trigger which will reconfigure the servers, do something with the server, and then your application is online. So fully focus on business logic. Your implementation is different, but the same idea. So you could push the business logic. It will cause, on OpenShift, let's say, a deployment change or config change event, which will rebuild your runtime, and your application becomes available, right?
Yeah. That's definitely what we want to get to.
Yeah, and this is actually serverless without, the disadvantage having to deal with functions, which are in larger applications really hard to deal with, because you get a couple of deployments, packages, deployment units, and with Quarkus you can have coarser grain units which are more suitable for business apps, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
And what the next added value of Quarkus is, that you get the native compilation for free, and this actually works out of the box. So I had already Graal VM installed, and I was actually curious what happened. So I recorded a screencast, by the way, only once. It worked out of the box, and I cross-compiled Quarkus to native image and started the image. It was like 20 megs, the image. And this image is what happens on my machine, on my Mac. I got a native image without any external dependencies. So this image is self-contained, right?
Yes.
And now with the next buzzword, what we got here is unikernels, right? So we could actually run this self-contained 20 meg image on Docker, without Docker, or whenever we like, on bare metal, just by running it. And this is actually the definition of unikernel, if you ask me.
Actually, when I say it's self-contained, it does have a few dependencies. Like it needs, there's a few low-level Linux libraries that it needs. I can't remember the complete list off the top of my head. Like it doesn't include its own copy of libc or anything like that.
Okay, but where are they? Where are the Linux dependencies?
Well, they'll be in the base image, generally.
In the base image?
So the runner, when you're talking about... Sorry, go.
I just run, the native image with outside Docker, and it just worked. So what I did, I just started the native image, which was cross-compiled from GraalVM, and it just worked.
Yeah. So they'll just be on your system. Like it's only if you're running an absolutely minimal Linux system with basically nothing there, like just the kernel, then you'd have issues.
Yeah.
But for any normal sort of distribution, it will just work.
Yeah. This is if you have, let's say CentOS 7 Linux installed, then it would just work, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Then I would say I would also classify it as unikernel idea. It has some dependencies on the Linux base system, but it's not like it is depending on JVM or something like this.
No.
Yeah, but this is remarkable, right? This is what I think what you achieved is you can have 80% of Java EE and create a native image which starts extremely fast. So it was like 10 milliseconds or something like this. And it's also very small. So my measurement was like it is around 10x smaller than comparable Java EE image, right?
Yeah, and that runner jar isn't compressed either, so you can actually zip it down into... Sorry, the runner image isn't actually compressed, so you can zip it down smaller if you want to send it over the network to thousands of computers.
Mm-hmm. So, right now it is unbelievable what you achieved, I would say, right?
Yeah, I'm really excited about Quarkus, and I think there's still a lot more that we can do with it.
Yeah, sure.
We've got a lot of plans.
And what's also good is for my clients, this is a Red Hat project. So I hope in one point of time they could actually even buy support, right?
That's the plan, yes. But I can't really comment on the time frame.
No. But it would be imaginable. Then they would be able to buy support from Red Hat to run Quarkus, which is not a toy, and they have some, let's say insurance. Because if you were, the only guy doing amazing work, what can happen, buzz factor or whatever, and then you are no more interested in on this project, and then will die. But with Red Hat, there is a little bit more, I would say, investment in future. And also, even if Quarkus will die, your code with a minor modification will still run on stock Java EE servers. This is also interesting. So you are not really depending on Quarkus. A little bit if you use this Panache, but it's not like huge vendor lock-in, or you will have to refactor the whole application in order to run on Quarkus, right?
No, it's still pretty much just following the standards for the most part. Like, we don't fully implement them, but we're implementing as much as we can. But there are some things that we just don't feel we can implement and still keep our fast startup speed and the really efficient compilation to native. So, for example, we don't support CDR portable extensions at the moment, just because if you get one badly written extension, it can really just slow down the whole startup time, and it's just not compatible with doing all the CDI processing at build time and then having a separate runtime step.
Mm-hmm.
Because the extensions can sort of change so much, then you kind of lose the ability to have the processing done at build time.
I don't think this is that important, because I think I had never a portable extension in a business app. So all business apps just use, a subset of CDI, so it's perfectly fine not to support portable extension, I would say.
Yeah, and we do have our own extension API. It's just not a standard one. So most of the stuff you do with portable extensions, you can still actually do with Quarkus. You just have to write a specific Quarkus extension.
Mm-hmm. Who got up with the name Quarkus? You know it?
I don't know who came it up. We had a big list, and I'm not sure who actually proposed it.
Okay.
But basically, there was a big list of potential names that we all came up with, and it got whittled down, and this was the one that everyone liked the most.
What struck me, which is actually a great idea, and I will borrow it in one point of time. So Quarkus is generated, the sample project, not with Maven archetype, rather than you created a plugin which is able to generate Quarkus bootstrap code. And this is genius because I also have Java E8 essential archetype on Maven Central. The problem with that is it always checks, the Maven Central, and it can take forever or so, nothing is downloaded. It just slows down the whole thing. And your plugin is very quick. So you just say, Quarkus : I think create or something like this. And it just creates the whole setup. And who got the idea? This is I really like it. So it is way better than Maven archetype approach.
So one of the big advantages that has is that all that code is just sort of not tied to Maven. Maven's just basically like an entry point to our CLI library. So we're planning on adding a lot more CLI-based tools, and you'll be able to both use Maven to run it or just have a sort of more traditional CLI as well. But we definitely didn't want to go down the archetype route just because there's just too many limitations that you can't do nearly as much with them.
Yeah. I in one of my current projects created an archetype and found out that Maven archetype is not very good in refactoring, so you cannot rename, deep package structures. One of the limitation. You could do some hacks with Groovy, but this is just a hack. But yeah, so this was actually interesting, and you can use one plugin for all. So you can use the plugin for create, then you have one plugin for build, and the same plugin for build, and the same plugin for dev. And this is really great for developer experience. So you don't have to remember a lot. You just have to know, Maven Quarkus : and then the command, which the developer experience is also great. So there are lots of developers right now in team. Who is the product manager that, has such a focus on developer experience? Or was it obvious for you all that it has to be easy and, and lean?
That was something that was always part of our brief, like in the proof of concept, was we needed to have a really good developer experience. Like we're talking about developer joy. So hot reload was actually one of the things that our initial proof of concept had to be able to support. So initially I was looking at doing it with fake replace, which is another library that I've wrote that does sort of lets you replace classes in a running JVM without dropping the class loader. But because Quarkus was restarting so quickly anyway, we didn't actually end up needing that.
So you're reloading everything?
Yeah, it just drops the class loader and reloads it. But it tends to only drop a very small sort of part of the app because it's just what's in your current working directory is the only bit that gets dropped. Everything else stays around. Mm-hmm. And because it sort of starts up so quickly that we found that even with larger apps, there was sort of no real gain in attempting to do anything more than that.
Yeah, and for the listeners, what you can do with Quarkus, you can say Quarkus : dev, and it would just build a system and watch for changes. And on every browser GET request, it will reload the Quarkus to the current version, right?
Yes. So it actually will check and see if any files have changed, and then it'll compile in the background, transparently swap it all out, and then that request will see the new app. So it's kind of like a PHP-like development experience where you just edit your code and hit refresh, and it's all there.
Mm-hmm. What's also interesting is the concept of Quarkus extensions. So, and it is also fully integrated with the plugin. So what you can say, I think Quarkus : list extensions, and then it will list all extensions are currently available right now. And then you can add the extension. So what I was curious is what happens behind the scenes. And what happens is you add a reference to POM, and then after rebuild, you will also find the reference in manifest MF of the runner. Is it right? So is this what happens?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
yes.
My follow-up question is, if I would just add a reference to a library in the POM without using this add extension, will the same happen? If I know which library is actually needed?
Yes. If you have libraries in your POM, they just get automatically copied into the lib directory, and there'll be a class path reference to them.
So the manifest MF is automatically generated, right?
Yes, the plugin generates that.
And this is actually really decent. So if you have, let's say, somehow simple libraries, it will work. If the library is using lots of reflection, probably the native compilation will be affected, but the standard Quarkus will always work, right? So I could have, regardless which complex libraries, and the Quarkus runner will run, but the native compilation, because of growl limitations, could fail. Is this right?
Yeah, that's right. So and in that case, you'd need to write an extension that sort of worked around the growl limitations.
Yeah, but this is also a clean concept, You can say add whatever you like to the POM XML, and whatever you did, it will end up in the lib, which is for me, is like the immutable layer or immutable infrastructure layer. And then the runner will automatically use that. And why it is so important? Because what I did as a proof of concept, I created an immutable Docker image with all the lib Quarkus, and then used the runner in image which inherits from the immutable image. And this looks exactly the same what I did with all the other war applications with ThinJARs. So this is pretty much the same approach, which is perfect for clouds, for all kind of clouds.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're aiming for. Like you can actually produce a traditional fat jar as well. There is a setting in the plugin, but by default we want we use the libjar approach just because it lets you have that layered approach.
But do you have any idea what would be, the case where you would really need the traditional fat jar? Do you have any idea? So what would be the use case for having a fat jar?
I think it's just personal preference. Like if you might just sort of find it easy to deal with one file, or it's sort of, for us, it's quite easy to generate because the way the plugin works is the output, there's no sort of that lib directory arrangement. It's just sort of something that comes out right at the end of the processing. It's not really tied to the core Quarkus functionality in any way. So we could actually generate any kind of output that we need to.
No, I know that you can do this, but for me it was always, I saw, lots of talks about fat jars and uber jars on conferences, and I never got the use case at my clients in business apps because you usually always had a Docker or virtualization or something, and in my eyes, fat jars make only sense if you don't have Docker. So let's say when you cannot separate between the infrastructure and the business logic. If you have containers, in my eyes, the fat jars do not make any sense except you are building, client apps like batch jobs which are running on desktops, for instance.
Yeah. So that's why the fat jars aren't the default, but you can still use them if you want them.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted, to ask your opinion whether you see a killer use case for fat jars. I cannot see any, so I'm always curious. I'm always asking, and no one could provide me a nice sample. What is the killer use case of fat jars or uber jars? I ask on conferences, after conferences, before conferences, and never got an answer. And so I also asked you, but I get the same answer. You could use it, but no one knows why. So I like the lib approach a lot, and as a default, this is, I would say, the right default setting. So
it also makes the build faster because you don't have to build the fat jars. It's a lot faster to just copy a library than it is to build a new zip file.
This is the next thing. So if you have a large zip file, you have to zip everything over and over again, or so just a fraction changed. And not only build, you will have to upload the whole stuff to the clouds.
Yeah.
And with Quarkus, you can upload, your lib folder once to the cloud, keep it in a private Docker registry or on OpenShift in a registry, and then just ship whatever changed. So it makes absolute sense in my eyes.
Yeah, you'd only need to update the lib directory if you've added a new library or changed a version or something like that. If you've just changed your business logic, you can just ship the runner jar, and that's it.
Yeah. And the only thing is what you can run issues into. So what I look at the manifest MF, and I believe there are versions numbers in there. So it won't be easy to upgrade to Quarkus 13, let's say, because the runner will like to see the old versions, right?
At the moment, yes. That's something we're actually actively looking at, is what the upgrade experience is going to be like. Like, at the moment, if you just updated your POM, when you like rerun the plugin, it will generate it pointing to the new version.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you actually would need to rerun the plugin anyway, because you want the new version to actually generate the extra bytecode that goes into that runner jar. Because when it does the processing, it needs to be processed with the same version that it's actually running with, because otherwise you'll probably get incompatibilities and it will all fall over.
Mm-hmm.
So what it actually does for it, is that at startup, it's when all the processing has actually already been done. So parsing web.xml or reading annotations, that all gets done as part of the plugin, and that gets translated into bytecode. So then what's actually in the runner is just the set of instructions to bootstrap the service without actually having to do any processing of annotations or XML or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. One approach would be, to strip the versions and just put a manifest or version info to the lib folder and to say which version is it, and then it could work or it could break, depends on whether the versions are backward compatible or not, right?
It will most likely break.
Okay.
Because the bytecode the code that's generated as part of that processing will be sort of highly tied to the version of Quarkus in use. Like if you change a method signature or something, then that can potentially impact the compatibility. So we want you to generate do the processing with the same version that actually is running with.
But let's say in traditional Java EE, let's say we have JAX or REST-2.1, and if REST Easy or Jersey come with new implementation or new version, minor version, it will still work because we are mostly relying on the API. You could have similar approach in Quarkus where you can say, okay, the implementation can change, but not the signatures, right?
Yeah, we could. We'll have to look at how we manage that going forward. Mm-hmm. But something that might be an issue there is if say there's a bug in the actual processing, that you'd need then to get that fixed, you need to actually rerun the processing in the plugin no matter what. Mm-hmm. So, like in general, if you've upgraded the version, you're always going to want to use the new processor.
Mm-hmm. And the immediate idea I got, what you could also do with your plugin is just to create from all the libraries in the lib folder one jar. So you have one jar, the runner, and the other jar, the image.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. That would be fairly simple.
Yeah, because this is even nicer, because then you can, FTP or whatever your image to somewhere and not, a couple of files. Even the Docker building would be easier and faster. And then this could be an idea.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can look at. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And what I also thought about, so what I wanted to do is, at the beginning, I saw Quarkus and your dev, the Quarkus.dev, like the hot reload. What would be great is that Quarkus is able to actually reload the browser. So what I thought about is to implement how it's called, I think CDP, Chrome Developer Tools Protocol, something like this, that write an extension that Quarkus will be able to reload the browser. And why I'm thought about that? Because I could do also a lot of, HTML, web components, JavaScript stuff. And if Quarkus would be able to reload the browser, so other way around, there will be the best possible developer experience, because right now I use browser sync to reload the browser, and I could use Quarkus on the other side. But having everything in one thing could be really great. So would be the right... So how to approach it? I think would be an Quarkus extension the right thing to do? I think not, right? Because Quarkus extension will end up being part of the structure. I will have to somehow hook into your replace process, right?
Yeah, so we actually have an API for that. But the only issue that you might have with it automatically refreshing is if it sort of auto refreshes code that isn't complete yet, and you'll get compilation failures. So I don't know how you deal with that sort of, because I don't think you'd really want, as soon as you start coding and save something, you get an error shop popping up because your code wasn't 100% complete.
So what I would rather do is to watch HTML, CSS, and JS changes, and I'll do something this. The browser will reload, and on demand either I will trigger, via REST your reload process or not. So way simpler than you think. So I would just focus in my plugin just on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you just hack JavaScript, Quarkus will notify the change in JavaScript and just reload the browser, nothing else. And if my JavaScript needs your REST endpoint, it will hit the endpoint, and then your tooling will decide whether to reload the bytecode or not.
Yeah, well, we could definitely do that. I guess my only real question is if that sort of actually belongs in Quarkus, or if that's, because I thought a lot of people do that using basically running a Webpack server with its hot reload mode enabled, then using it to proxy back to sort of the Java application.
Yeah, but this Webpack is getting, I would say, at least in my world, less and less popular because the web standards are more and more powerful, so you don't need that much processing, at least not in enterprise projects. So in most enterprise projects, we just use modern ES6 without any NPM, so it's just nothing. And Quarkus is actually small enough that you can create, a bundle which comprises HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Quarkus, both in one place.
Okay, then yeah. Well, that would definitely be something that would be good to have. Mm-hmm. It's just I'm not really a UI programmer, so I don't actually know what makes the most sense from a workflow point of view because it's not something I really do very much.
I would, if I have some time, I would just take a look at the CDP. How hard is it just to tell browser, please reload now, nothing else, and then how to hook in this into Quarkus. So Quarkus will have to watch HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files as well, and then notify my stuff, and this would be set. So this is just the idea I got immediately with as I saw Quarkus, because right now I use browser sync outside. And then if the browser sync reloads my JavaScript stuff and calls a server. And the issue you get there, you have to install, the CORS filter on the server. And otherwise you get CORS exceptions. And if everything were within Quarkus, this could be interesting, at least for prototyping. Just an idea. So it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could definitely look at doing that. That's the sort of thing we really want to look at doing, is just making the developer experience as good as possible.
Yeah, and this is, I think, developer experience is widely underappreciated in the enterprise world. This is what I never got. If you look on some frameworks, would like to mention now, but it looks like I would say nuclear reactor. And it is just does CRUD behind the scenes in all possible things. And Quarkus is, I would say, very pragmatic and very simple code. And by accident, what you are doing with Quarkus, for instance, what you're proposing is add inject without private. Otherwise, we get trouble with the native compilation. And I always did that in my Java EE projects because this private for add inject doesn't make any sense. It's a way easier to test because my unit test can just automatically replace all references and mock them out. So it's way easier to test. So it's also your Quarkus code looks almost like my Java EE code.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. And you asked me a couple of questions via email. You remember them in my screencast, why I removed the plugin. Do you remember the questions? Would you like to ask the questions right now?
Well, why in your screencast were you deleting the Quarkus plugin from the build?
Yes. So this was the first screencast, and what was curious is how much magic is there involved, and what happens behind the scenes, and what interests me. Can I just do the same with just Maven clean install without any plugins? So is it possible, let's say, to create the POM XML with archetype, not with your tooling, and will it still work? And the result is it does work, because in subsequent podcasts I didn't use it anymore, and I think this is very important for enterprise projects, Because if the perception is that in order to use Quarkus, you have to use always fancy plugins and so forth, it will die. But if the message is, it is like, you can use the plugins to enhance the experience, but they are not mandatory. You can still use whatever you like. You can go, with VI, create your Quarkus project, and it will run. It's not as convenient, but it will do. This is actually the reason why I did it.
Well, you still need some form of tooling to do the processing at some point.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be tied to Maven. Like at some point, we'll probably actually have just a standard command line task we could run to sort of Quarkify an app. But it still does need some processing done at some point.
Yeah.
Because that's where
the build.
That's what actually creates the app. Yeah.
So I will have to run Maven build in order to create, these specific Quarkus deployable, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And what I do in my current project is the following. So my POMs in Java EE are very thin. So there is never fail-safe plugins or Surefire plugins. Everything is out. And so I would say more than 50% of my project are actually running on OpenShift. And on OpenShift, we have a Jenkins file. And this Jenkins files contains the processing instruction. So what I will do in my project in Quarkus is, so the build advice would be actually, it is mandatory to have on the Jenkins pipeline in order to build the application, and developers could do whatever they like. But for me, it is very important to understand what happens behind the scenes. It means I will have unit tests, integration tests, and so forth, and the Quarkus would be built with Quarkus build on Jenkins, and and on the developer machine they could use Quarkus build or not, but it doesn't have to be in the POM. So what we do, we clearly separate the build process from the developer process. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I can understand. I can understand that.
Yeah, because in some of projects, if you're dealing with external companies, it's like the POM comprises 500 plugins and no one knows what they are doing. This is the issue. It's not like an issue with your Quarkus plugin, rather than every developer has a set of plugins. And for me, it is very common to look at POM, which comprises, no kidding, 2,000 lines of code in POM. And I've asked what the plugins are doing. No one knows it anymore. So what I do in project, I try to delete as much as possible and just focus what we really need, in order to develop the stuff.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And also, because Quarkus is, I would say, modular, so the build can be run whenever you like, you could put, the Quarkus build in Visual Studio Code, for instance, and keep it completely out from Maven, so it will still work. So this was why I did it in my screencast.
Yeah, the build is definitely not tied to Maven. So, yeah, potentially we can write extensions for different IDEs to just run it directly from the IDE without having Maven involved at all.
Yeah. And you ask other questions as well?
I can't actually remember what it was. I thought that.
I have one feedback as well, as you can search for the questions, but the feedback is, you used rest assured for the unit tests or system tests. This is what I never do. I never use rest assured in my project, and the reason for that is, if you are in microservice environment and you have system tests, which rest assured does, I usually use rest easy or Jersey. Usually Jersey, because there's less issues with HTTP connection pooling. And the reason being is, if you test your code with JAX-RS, what you can do, you can copy and paste the test, put it to another microservice, and you have the communication layer completely reused. And rest assured, you can just use it for testing, nothing else. So because you cannot ship, rest assured in production, or you shouldn't. So this is the reason why I actually never use rest assured.
Okay.
This is the feedback I can give you. So, yeah. But anything else is a remarkable tool. So I will really, usually I'm not very interested in alternative runtimes to Java EE, because something like Whitefly, Tommy, Payara, or Open Liberty, they work really well. They are extremely fast. But the first time I saw something with added value, which is the native compilation, and it really starts quickly, And I already see a few cases where I could use Quarkus on my client. So in one particular project is a kind of load balancer with a little bit JAX-RS and CDI. So this could be used. And in other project we have like big data processing, like batch jobs. I think Quarkus could be interesting as well.
Okay. Yeah, well, Quarkus is going to have a lot of work done over the next 12 months, like as we work towards a 1.0 release. So like what's there now will be expanded upon a lot. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we'll never sort of implement a full Java EE application server just because there's a lot of stuff there that isn't really relevant to modern apps. But hopefully we'll sort of be able to handle all the use cases that a Java EE app server could handle, even if it might not be quite the same way.
Absolutely. And could you also use Quarkus as a command line tool? For instance, what I usually like to do is to create a small tools for automation on my local machine with Java. So could you misuse Quarkus as a command line tool which kicks something in? So is it possible?
Not right now due to a bug, but it's definitely going to be possible maybe in the next release or the release after. I think it should be fixed in the next release. But yeah, you can definitely write command line tools. We'll be able to write command line tools with it as well if you want. Cool. And then compile them down to native.
Yeah, this would be a killer use case in my case. So I have lots of Java automation processes and I would like to replace them with native commands, and this could be an interesting option.
Yeah, we're definitely going to support that. And potentially we might have our own Quarkus CLI that's compiled down to native, so you can say create project will just be a native command that you can run very fast.
Mm-hmm. And what is on your roadmap? Or what is coming in the next releases? Or what is the best possible case for Quarkus? What do you would like to achieve? And yeah.
So one of the big things we're going to be working on over the next few months is how we're going to do our sort of community support. So at the moment, when you list extensions, it's only showing the core ones that are part of the main code base. But we want to make it really easy to contribute extensions and sort of have them be easy to discover and easy to view their documentation and just easy to include them in your project. So that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. And do you need support from the community? So how the community can reach Quarkus or you, or, what are the references?
So all this stuff isn't quite ready yet, but in the next the next month, hopefully we will actually have it ready, and we do have some guides for an extension author's guide, but we also want to improve the tooling around that as well.
Mm-hmm. But what I meant is how the community can provide you feedback or commits.
We have a developer list,
mm-hmm.
which is
I'll put it in the show notes. Quarkus.io, I think.
Yeah, it's a Google group. Quarkus Dev. I think it's a Quarkus Dev Google group.
So, and the last question I have. Will to be particular OpenShift Quarkus integration, or what's planned there? So something happens on this front, or?
Yes, we definitely are going to try and make the OpenShift experience be as smooth as possible. Exactly what form that's going to take is not 100% certain now, but that's definitely something that's going to be improved over the next few months.
So perfect. So. How the listeners can reach you on Twitter, GitHub, and whatever you have, blog? Do you have some references?
Yeah, so Twitter, I'm Stuart W. Douglas, and same with GitHub.
Okay, cool. So thank you, and I would try to ping you in a few months and see what happened with Quarkus, right?
Okay, looking forward to it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.